Hello, how are you? My name is Mr. Jono, and today I will be leading us through a virtual enrichment lesson. I am an artist who lives in New Orleans who specializes in painting and printmaking. Most of my artwork is all abstract that I've come up with either on the spot or from a very small idea I have in my head. I'm also an enrichment instructor with Community Works. Today, I'll be leading a lesson on one-point perspective. Do you know what one-point perspective is? Well, if not, don't worry. We'll be going over the definition of one-point perspective, how to use it in our artwork, and also how to recognize it in everyday life, such as at school, on the playground, and even at home with our family. This lesson is focused for children 2nd grade through 5th grade, but is also good for students of all ages. And it would also be a good idea before we get started to wash our hands. It's customary to wash our hands for 20 seconds so that we are confident that we are clean of germs and won't spread any harmful bacteria to anyone else around us or even on the artwork that we're creating. So remember, right before you get started, go to the sink and wash your hands for 20 seconds. You can say your ABCs, as that is about how long it takes for you to wash your hands appropriately. Okay, let's get started. Have you ever been riding in a car and you look out the window as you cross the railroad tracks? Maybe you see something similar to this. Notice how the railroad tracks start really wide at the bottom and get really narrow and end at a point at the top. Maybe you've been on the 2nd floor of a building and you've looked out the window and you saw the rest of the city and it appeared something like this. Again, where the road is really big as it's close to you, and as you look far away, objects appear smaller. Maybe you've been walking down the street with your parents or with your friends and you look up towards the sky and you see giant buildings and it looks something like this. Well, these are all different examples of one-point perspective shown in real life. So one-point perspective can be seen out in the streets of a big city. It can be seen in the building of a school or a house, or it can even be seen on the playground. So what is the official definition of one-point perspective? Well, I'll read it to you right now. One-point perspective is a mathematical system for representing three-dimensional objects and space on a two-dimensional surface by means of intersecting lines that are drawn vertically and horizontally and that radiate from one point on a horizon line. Wow, that sounds pretty tough. And in fact, we'll go over some of those vocabulary words so we have a better understanding of this official definition. But let's dissect the definition in hopes that it makes more sense to us. Although this definition sounds complicated, the concept of one-point perspective is extremely easy and simple. One-point perspective is just a drawing method that shows how things appear to get smaller as they get further away. The way that happens is the images converge towards a single vanishing point on the horizon line. Now don't worry, we're going to learn exactly what a vanishing point and a horizon line is. So in other words, one-point perspective is a way for drawing objects to appear three-dimensional on a two-dimensional surface. Now I know we just used a big definition that had a lot of words and a lot of vocabulary that we may not be familiar with. So I have written everything down that we've talked about on this dry erase board, including the materials that we'll need. So one-point perspective, right here. A drawing method used to show how things appear to get smaller as they get further away. It is a way of drawing three-dimensional objects on a flat surface. Now, some of the vocabulary words that we'll want to be familiar with are horizon line, vanishing point, parallel, horizontal line, vertical line, form, and plane. Now, horizontal line and horizon line, though are similar, are actually very different, and we'll be sure to focus on that when we get to our definitions. Also, the materials that we need are right over here. All we need is a white piece of paper, a pencil, an eraser, and a ruler if you have one. It's only optional. Now, with the white paper, it would be best to have paper that is fairly big, something bigger than a computer paper. But if computer paper is all you have, that will work perfectly. So again, take a moment to read over the definition of one-point perspective, the vocabulary that we'll be using, and the materials that we'll be using. Now, before we can move forward, we must review our vocabulary and materials list. Behind me, I've written down the definitions of all the vocabulary words that we'll use in our lesson. Let's take a look at them. All right. First word is horizon line. Horizon line is written right at the top. The horizon line is an apparent line that separates the sky and the earth. So if you were to look out your window and you could see off in the distance, as far as you could see, the point where the sky meets the ground is called the horizon line. Some people also refer to it as the skyline. The next vocabulary word is vanishing point. The vanishing point is a dot on the horizon line where objects appear to converge. So when we get into our lesson, we'll be drawing horizon lines and vanishing points, and you will see that when we start to draw our objects in three-dimensional views, those objects will converge towards the vanishing point. That'll make a lot more sense when we start drawing on paper. The next word is parallel line. Parallel line, or parallel lines, are two lines that are always the same distance apart. So if two lines are traveling next to each other for an infinite amount of time, if they are parallel, they will always stay the same distance apart from each other. A horizontal line is a line that extends up and down, top to bottom. So a vertical line is the opposite of that. A vertical line is a line that extends to the left and to the right. So one goes up and down, and one goes side to side. Now the last two words can sometimes be tricky if they're not used properly. The next word is form. Form is the shape and structure of an object being drawn. So you'll notice once we get started on this perspective drawing, we're going to start out by turning squares and rectangles into boxes and cubes. Those squares and rectangles and boxes and cubes are the form of our drawing. That's what we're drawing. It's usually the object that you're working on is the form. Now a plane is the surface or area that is being used to draw or create. So if you decided that you'd like to do a charcoal drawing on a piece of paper, the piece of paper is the plane. If you'd like to do a big mural on the side of a house or a building, that building's wall is the plane. So the form is what you're drawing, and the plane is where you're drawing the form. Okay? So once again, we have horizon line, vanishing point, parallel line, horizontal line, vertical line, form, and plane. Now I'll give you about 20 or 30 seconds to look that over and read that and make any notes that you might want to. Okay, that turns out to be a little bit shorter than 20 seconds, but remember, if you need more time, you can always pause the video and jot down any information that you need to, and then play the video when you're ready. Okay, so now that we have an understanding of vocabulary that we're going to be using, we'll quickly review the materials that we'll need. Again, we want to draw on a white piece of paper, preferably a piece of paper that's bigger than this. This is just a computer sheet of paper. But if this is all you have, and you can see I'm using the back of a piece of paper to conserve. So remember, you can always draw on the front and the back of paper. You don't have to throw your paper away just because you made a mark on one side. So a piece of white paper, preferably a little bit bigger, but if not, this is a perfect size. And if you don't have white paper, it can be yellow, it can be green, it can be whatever color you want. Obviously, if we need paper, we'll need a pencil. I have a really cool drawing pencil that I bought at the art store. It's almost been sharpened down to a little bitty one. Nonetheless, it's perfect and it still works. And an eraser. I have a weird gummy pull-apart eraser that kind of looks like this. It's like Mr. Stretch a little bit. But you can use any eraser that you have, even the eraser that comes on the end of your pencil. And if you're lucky enough to have a ruler, that will go a long way in us making straight lines. But once again, the ruler is not mandatory, and all great artists eventually learn how to draw a straight line on their own. So, now that we've reviewed the definition of one-point perspective, we've reviewed all the vocabulary that we're going to use and their definitions, and then we've reviewed the materials that we're going to need, we're all set to begin our drawings, or studies, whichever you prefer to call. Okay. Now we're ready to get started on our one-point perspective studies. So I'm going to do all my drawing on this big giant erase board so I can draw big enough for everyone to see. Again, if you only have a smaller sheet of paper, that's no problem. That'll work just fine. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw my horizon line. Now we get to pick wherever we want to draw it. So if you want to draw it down low, you can do that, or if you want to draw it up higher, you can do that. For beginners, I suggest to draw your line somewhere in the middle of the piece of paper. It'll make things down the road a little bit easier. So I'm going to draw my horizon line and label it so we don't forget exactly what that is. Here we go. All right. Now, I'm also going to do this entire drawing with no rulers, so hopefully I can give you a little confidence to keep on trying and keep on experimenting even if you don't have a ruler to make a straight edge. You can already see my line's a little crooked right here. So in the end, that shouldn't be a problem, and as we grow and learn more about perspective, we can refine the straightness of our lines, or maybe we can get a ruler down the road and use that. So, once again, we have our horizon line drawn, and all we're doing so far is indicating that up here is the sky and down here is the earth. So, the next thing that we want to do is draw a vanishing point. Now that can be anywhere along the line, okay? If you do it too far towards the edges, you might have some problems later down the road. If you do it too far in the middle, it might look a little boring. So I'm going to suggest to put it in the middle on one half of the page. So maybe right here, or maybe somewhere in there. So I'm going to put mine right here. Okay. So now we have a horizon line and a vanishing point. Okay? And I'll put a little VP right there so we all understand. Okay. So now when we draw our boxes and rectangles and cubes, everything is going to converge, where is it, to that vanishing point right there, okay? So, also, I'm going to draw 4 different examples so you can see what it looks like if you choose to draw your box below the horizon line, or above the horizon line, or on that side of the paper, or on this side of the paper. So, the next thing that we're ready to do is to draw either a square or a rectangle. Once again, you can draw it anywhere you'd like, and I'm going to give you multiple examples of 3-dimensional objects all over the page. Okay? So I'm going to turn around and draw my first square. If you'd like to draw a rectangle, draw a rectangle. All right, so there's my square. You notice how if you're staring at the board, the square is to the left, or as you're looking at it right now, it's to the right. So the next thing we're going to do, and also notice that that's not a perfect square. Not all my lines are completely perfect, so don't worry about that. So the next thing we're going to do is draw our guidelines from the appropriate places on the box to the vanishing point. So what are the appropriate places? Well, I'm going to point them out. We want to draw our lines from this corner, and this corner. So you'll notice it's 3 of the 4 corners. So this one is a corner that we're not going to draw a line because, well, we'll see why we don't draw it in the immediate future. So now that we've figured out which corners that we would like to draw from, let's go ahead and draw those lines. And they're guidelines, so if you'd like to use a dotted line to remind you that they're guidelines, then you can do that as well. So it should look something like this. So now you can see that we've got our guidelines here, here, and here. So even though there are 4 corners to a box, we're only drawing guidelines on 3 of the corners. So now, the next thing we have to do is determine how big or how deep we want our box to be. And again, you can choose any depth that you would like. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to draw a parallel line on this side that's parallel to this line, and a parallel line on this side that's parallel to this. All right? So I'm going to go ahead and draw mine so you can get a visual idea of what I'm saying. Okay, so now that's drawn, and all we have to do is connect our guidelines, and then we'll have a 3-dimensional box on a 2-dimensional surface. So let me do that so we can see what that looks like. Whoop. Okay, and there's our box. And you know that it is in perfect perspective because each 3 lines converge on the vanishing point. And the reason that we did not draw a line from this corner is because we're assuming that our box is one solid shape and that we can't see through the box. So if we can't see through the box, there's no reason to draw a line from that corner all the way to the vanishing point. Okay? So now there's only one more thing left to do. So we've drawn the box, we've drawn our guidelines that converge on our vanishing point, and we've connected the appropriate corners with those lines to the vanishing point, and we've drawn the tops and the sides of our box. So now the only thing we have to do is to erase our guidelines and clean everything up, and that would look like this. So now we have a complete understanding, even though my box is a little crooked, exactly how you draw a 3-dimensional object onto a 2-dimensional surface. And the more we practice, and the more we learn, and the more we interact with each other, the more confidence that we'll have in applying this to our own drawing techniques. So once you have this concept down, you can add boxes all over the plane. You can add boxes on top of each other. You can turn boxes into buildings, into houses, even into circular objects like light poles or something like that. So this is a tool that you can use and implement in anything that you're drawing if you want to make the viewer feel like they're looking at a 3-dimensional object on a 2-dimensional surface. So, like I promised, I'm going to give you a couple more examples, and hopefully that'll give you some visual ideas of what you can accomplish with this technique. So now I have one box here. I'm going to come over to the other side and draw a couple more boxes. On this side, I think I'm going to draw a rectangle. I'm going to make it long, like this. All right, there, that's perfect. On this side, I'm going to draw a skinny rectangle, skinny and tall rectangle. And then over here, way up in this corner, I'm going to draw another box. Okay, so using the lessons that we just learned, we can apply that to make these three-dimensional objects. So I'm going to start at this one over here and connect our lines to the appropriate corner, or connect our appropriate corners to the vanishing point. So that's going to look like this. And this time I'm going to use solid lines because I myself got a little confused with the dotted lines down here. But remember, you can use solid lines or dotted lines. At the end of the day, we're going to erase them so our image looks as beautiful as possible. All right, here we go. Whoa, that's a super crooked line, but don't worry about it if your lines aren't straight. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and do this one step on the other two so we can kind of create these boxes all together, or these three-dimensional shapes all together at the same time. Okay, next stop is this one. All right, and now we have this one. All right, so now you can kind of see these shapes coming from all directions, all over our plane, and each form is in a different part of the plane, which gives us a different point of view. And we'll kind of talk about that in our conclusion, okay? So now step 2 is to indicate how big or how deep we want that each box to be. So over here, I'm going to make this square much longer and much deeper than this square. So I'm going to draw a parallel line way down here. So even though these lines aren't matching up to each other like this, they're more jagged like this, they're still parallel. So remember, a parallel line are two lines that run right next to each other the same distance apart for its entirety. Okay? So now that I've drawn that one, I'm going to draw the vertical line, the vertical parallel line, right there. So you can see I kind of made an L shape, even though right now it's backwards. So once we've done that, now I've connected all the sides of my cube and have a three-dimensional object right there. So let me grab this eraser and we'll erase our guidelines. All right, and now we have a box floating in the air. And that's pretty cool, huh? So I want you to realize that you can achieve various points of view through depending on where you put your box in the plane. All right, so let's move right along. I'm gonna make this one really long too. Woo. Okay, so you can see that this box was came down so low that it's almost parallel with our vanishing point. So this converging line is going to be really thin, the one that we just drew, and then this one is going to come just like that. So it's kind of it's kind of an interesting perspective. So I'm going to erase our guidelines just like that and clean up our box a little bit. And now we have, though not the prettiest, we have a three-dimensional box here as well. Okay? So I'm going to do that one more time on our last example, and then I'll make this one really thin since we made the last one really thick. All right? that one looks good. So now that we've drawn our lines and connected all of our corners, I'm going to erase our guidelines that take us to the vanishing point. All right, perfect. Okay, so there you go. That's 4 examples of one-point perspective in different areas of the plane. So if you remember, our horizon line separates the sky from the ground. So these 2 boxes are placed on the ground, so our point of view makes it seem like we're standing up over the boxes and looking down on them. So it's like if you were standing up and looking down towards the ground, you would see the boxes that are represented in this particular angle. These 2 are what we call bird's eye view boxes. So we made these boxes appear that they're floating in the air. So these boxes represent as if you were looking up in the air and you saw big cubes floating in the air. So I wanted to show you that not only can you draw boxes below the horizon line, but you can also draw them above the horizon line. And you can also draw them on one side or the other. And also don't forget that your horizon line can be raised or lowered to your preference, and your vanishing point can be put anywhere along that horizon line. Okay? So there you have it. That's how you do one-point perspective. So if you need to review any directions or materials from this video, feel free to rewind and go over the part that you need the most help with. Until then, we have finished up here, and I will presume with some questions and a conclusion about what we learned and the vocabulary we use to learn it. All right? Thank you for participating, and I hope you made some beautiful 3-dimensional boxes. All right, now that we've had some time to practice one-point perspective, we will review some key points, go over the vocabulary, and then use the final time we have for any questions. So, in conclusion, to draw something in one-point perspective, we need a horizon line, a vanishing point, all drawn on a plane, which in this case is a piece of paper. So, once we draw our horizon line and vanishing point, which could be anywhere that we'd like, we draw a box or a rectangle, and then from that box, we draw our guidelines from each corner to the vanishing point. Then, we draw parallel lines to close the box, and then after that, we erase our guidelines so we have a beautifully drawn 3-dimensional object. Okay? So, were you able to draw a 3-dimensional object? Did you have any problems? Was anything unclear for you in the directions? Well, hopefully everything was easy for you to understand, and if you did have some trouble, please rewind this lesson and review the parts that you struggled with, okay? Were you able to apply the vocabulary to the drawing that you made? Do you remember what the vocabulary words were? Well, we used words like horizon line, vanishing point, parallel lines, horizontal lines, vertical lines, form, and plane. Okay? So we've already talked about a horizon line and a vanishing point. And don't forget that parallel lines are 2 lines that run right next to each other, the same distance apart, all the way. Okay? And remember, a horizontal line is a line drawn left to right or right to left, and a vertical line is a line drawn top to bottom or bottom to top. Okay? So, with that being said, and obviously form is the object that we're drawing, in this case boxes or 3-dimensional cubes, and the plane is the area in which we're drawing those boxes on. Okay, so did you have any trouble with this demo? Was there anything that you didn't understand? Was there anything that, did I speak too fast? Did I speak too slow? Did I use words that you already knew and therefore made the video boring? Well, be sure that you take the time to ask your questions or type your comments in the comment section right below this video. There we can learn from each other, we can teach each other things, And you can also help me by telling me what I did correctly and what I need to work on in an effort for all of us to understand this together. So don't forget that you can always rewind the video to a part that you didn't understand, and you can always ask a question or give a piece of advice in the comment section that's below. So with this knowledge that we have, we're going to learn how to, well, obviously we learned how to work with one-point perspective. And once we have this down and once we understand one-point perspective, we can move on to two-point and three-point perspective. Those are very exciting techniques to use, but we can't move forward until we have a really good understanding of one-point perspective. So if you feel like you need a little work before we can move on to the next lesson, then be sure and get your practice in, rewatch this video, and ask as many questions as you need to in order to completely understand what's going on. All right? And one other thing I'd like to share with you is the same thing I shared for you when we started this video, is to remember to always wash your hands and be clean and neat as possible. Luckily, this is a lesson that doesn't require a lot of dirty materials like paint or charcoal or ceramic, clay, or anything like that. So this should not be too dirty of a lesson for you to work on at home. Once again, all you need is a piece of paper and a pencil and an eraser, and you can experiment all day and all night long with one-point perspective. So, with that being said, please remember to wash your hands and stay clean and stay healthy and be good to one another. Be nice to your friends, be nice to your family. We're all in this together, so if there's anything that we can do to ease the time or learn something new and creative, we should take that opportunity. I look forward to seeing your one-point perspective drawings as soon as possible, and I look forward to moving on to two- and three-point perspective when you're ready. Thank you.